please. If you all stand.
Father, we thank you for the city council, for the meeting tonight. Lord, we ask you to bless our city, and we ask you to bless this meeting. Give wisdom, God, to those decisions that have to be made tonight, and we give you praise for that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
If you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I
pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Mayor Eloise Taylor.
Here.
Vice Mayor Bill Colombo.
Here.
Councilman Steve O'Neill.
Here.
Councilwoman Nancy Britton. Here. Councilman Terrence Rowe.
Here.
City Attorney Joseph Public.
Here.
And City Manager Tom O'Neill.
All right, the first item is the approval of council minutes for the regular city council meeting minutes of August 12, 2014. Do I have a motion to approve? Is there a second?
Second.
Any additions, corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, passes. Announcements, Mr. O'Neill.
None at this time.
Mr. Public.
Nothing. Thank you.
All right, anybody from the public wishing to address us this evening? Yes, Mr. Brown.
Thomas Brown, 7436 Candlelight Court. In June of 2013, I asked Sherry Ewald, when will code enforcement recognize and enforce the 5-foot wide easement along the edge of Lake Cox? Her written response on June 21st was, met with Joe Public and he reviewed the paperwork in reference to the easement. We are not able to determine a 5-foot easement between the property line and the water. Therefore, we will not enforce the easement at this time. The easement is there. Look at the documentation. For more than 1 year, I've been trying to get the city of Port Richey to recognize the 5-foot wide perpetual public easement that runs along the west and southwest edge of Lake Cox. The 5 pages of documentation that I have provided you with all come from Pasco County Plat Book 18, pages 59 and 60. The map, page 1, shows the easement runs from the lake edge 5 foot inland on land. Where the property owner's property ends in relation to the lake edge is irrelevant. The agreement reached between the builder, Keith Collenbaum, Pasco County, and the City of Port Richey City Council was that all of the map drawn up by a licensed and registered land surveyor was accurate. Please see the certificate of approval of the Port Richey City Council on page 4. Also note on page 5 that Plat Book 18, pages 59 and 60 were filed and recorded, including all of the public easements. Page 2 describes the easements as perpetual public easements. Page 3 describes how the easements are indicated on the map. I want the city attorney to concede that the public must be allowed to go on any recorded perpetual public easement that is depicted on Plat Book 18. The Port Richey City Council agreed as to the existence of the easements and where they are located. There are 30 homes in the Candlelight subdivision. 29 of them have no problem with people going on the easements. Only one homeowner has fences across the easements that won't allow the public to go on the easements. At the August 12th meeting, the city council meeting, city attorney made the following 3 false or misleading statements. In regards to Lake Cox, he said, 1990 is the first sign of a body of water. Check the 1980 map. It clearly shows Lake Cox. He also said the 5-foot wide easement needs to be surveyed. It has already been surveyed by a licensed, registered land surveyor. Thirdly, he said, I don't know where the easement is. It could be 10 feet out in the water. Check the map. The surveyor shows the easement starts where the lake meets the land and runs 5 foot inland on land.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Brown. Anyone else? All right, bring it back to council. Do we have any comments from council?
Mr. Public, what do you, how do you feel on these new developments? Any different?
I don't see there being any new development, sir.
One question I have for the building department, was a survey done at the time of the fence construction?
No.
Anybody else?
Not right now.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second for discussion.
Okay, a motion and second, yes. Go ahead, Terry.
Just to, wanted to thank again Mr. Dobies for his gift of this dog that we are probably going to retire tonight. I think it's been a nice addition to the city.
That's what I, consent agenda. You're ahead. You're one ahead.
Yeah, well.
No,
I'm
it's
looking
under
at it.
No,
consent.
we're on the consent agenda.
It's under
okay.
the, it is under
We're
the
good.
consent agenda,
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That's right. Anyway, thank you again to Mr. Dobies, and it's a sad thing. I asked Mr. O'Neill today if the dog gets a pension. But yeah, I think it was a great asset. We did have some arrests, as I remember, because of this addition to the police department. So whether we have one in the future is open for discussion, but thank you, Mr. Dobies, for everything you do for us.
Okay.
Have we spoken to Mr. Dobies about this? Do you know, Tom, Chief?
Oh, I spoke to him yesterday. I called him and told him all the circumstances, and he was delighted at the success of the dog program.
Okay.
And said whenever we're ready, he'll buy the next dog for us.
Okay, okay.
So he said just call and tell him how much the check should be for.
Very good.
Well, I would like to at least send an official letter to him, thanking him for that extremely generous gift to us and his gracious offer of future assistance.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
It passes. All right, let's move on to council business. The first is the floodplain ordinance. First reading, Mr. O'Neill.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a rather lengthy ordinance. As you will recall, I sent it to you sometime back to perhaps get any questions answered or receive any comments as you saw appropriate. It's on for first reading tonight. Second reading will be at the City Council meeting on September 9. And as I've indicated in the memo, this is relevant to Section 8 of the Land Development Code, Flood Management Ordinance. The city, as you may be aware, has been a participant in the National Flood Insurance Program since 1981. That program allows residents to purchase flood insurance at a reduced rate that's subsidized by the federal government. FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, has prepared a new flood insurance study and flood insurance rate map that will become effective on September 26. This ordinance is directly relevant to that, and the importance of this ordinance is that the city cannot participate in the National Flood Insurance Program unless this ordinance is adopted, which would affect many residents of the city of Port Richey. Just to briefly recap, the ordinance does the following. It adopts the new flood insurance rate maps that are effective on September 26, 2014. It adopts the current Florida Building Code regardless of when it changes, and it requires the floodplain administrator, which in our case is building official Bill Goldberg, to maintain a permanent record of any and all documents, site plans, elevations, permits, or rulings having anything to do with properties in the floodplain. It requires anything that's built in the floodway or riverine area or any modifications thereof, altering the flood conditions to be verified by a professional engineer, and that includes anything having to do with modifications to the rivers, watercourses, or flood paths. It also requires certified finished floor elevations for all structures in the city, and it maintains that the finished floor elevation be built 1 foot above the base flood elevations as depicted on the new firm maps. The current rules that we have use the July 5, 1983 firm maps. As I mentioned earlier, it's in front of you for first reading. It's a very lengthy ordinance. It has been reviewed by the city attorney. The action requested of you tonight is to consider approval of this ordinance on first reading. It will appear in front of you again on July 23. It has been reviewed and recommended for approval by the City Planning and Zoning Board at a meeting that was held on July 23, 2014. And action to approve this ordinance on first reading is recommended. I did want to mention, Mayor, this is a public hearing and public comment would be appropriate at this time.
Mr. Public, will you read the caption of the ordinance, please?
Certainly, Mayor. Ordinance number 14-641, ordinance by the City Council amending the City of Port Richey's Land Development Code to repeal Chapter 8, to adopt a new Chapter 8, flood damage prevention, to adopt flood hazard maps, to designate a floodplain administrator, to adopt procedures and criteria for development in flood hazard areas, and for other purposes, to adopt local administrative amendments to the Florida Building Code, providing for applicability, repeal or severability, and an effective date.
Okay. All right, discussion.
I just have a quick question. Are we going to see changes in the City of Port Richey's zones? Like, this is the flood map that I think we were given, and it looks like there's going to be some changes.
From what I understand, there were no substantial changes in the City of Port Richey, no additional areas that were in the floodplain. If there's a specific concern, let me know, and
All right.
the expert in this is Cindy Jolly, and she couldn't be here tonight. I was trying to get in contact with her, and she's on vacation in Pasco County, so we can get you an answer to your specific question. I don't believe there are any changes that are significant.
Well, the 1 foot above is a significant change, isn't it?
No, that's correct.
Has it always been current, 1
Yes.
foot above floodplain?
Yes.
Okay. I was mistaken on that then.
That's correct, right, Bill?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right,
Certainly, I was just going to say, the reference to the 1 foot freeboard requirement for new construction, substantial improvement. I'm not a building expert, but obviously that's a change.
No, we had that in our previous.
Oh, you did?
ordinance,
Okay,
yeah. So
okay.
it's 1 foot, and it included, for the A zones, it'd be 1 foot. The base flood elevation, the finished floor have to be 1 foot above base flood elevation. In your V zones, it would have to be lowest horizontal member, it would have to be 1 foot.
And obviously important, because this equates to a 15% discount under the Class 7 rating for Port Richey residents. So I don't want to say for sure, but when you talked about changes, and we would ask this expert, this is some time ago, I was told this was more on the eastern sections that there were some changes. Nothing on the west side. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if that's true or not.
It was my understanding that there were no significant changes in the new maps. I will, however, confirm that and get back with each of you.
I think there were some changes in the county for things inland.
Going back to, and I'm looking for the definition here. And it's here, but it doesn't, any combination of. As far as the 50% aspect of whether you have to elevate, due to damage, there was a lot of talk at one time whether that was over a certain period of time, like 50% within a year, 50% within 5 years, or 50% over the lifetime of the structure.
This ordinance stipulates a one-year time period.
1 year time period. So if there is an event and somebody does a repair and it's under, or if somebody does an upgrade and it's under 50%, it's 1 year.
That's correct.
Okay, because I know that was a big point of contention. It's
And I wanted to mention, too, that this ordinance was developed by the Division of Emergency Management, and all jurisdictions are faced with adopting this ordinance specific to their jurisdiction before September 26.
Right, right. That's the other question I was going to ask you, is basically they're putting this in front of us essentially as a sort of a take it or leave it sort of ordinance. You either take it and you take the 15%, or you don't and you don't. You can make it more stringent, but you can't back anything off of it.
You can make it more stringent.
Right, right.
I mean, it's not exactly a take it or leave it. It's just an update. I would.
Right, but there's just so much playing around you can do. I
Yeah.
mean, if we were to dig that deep into it, and anything we would do, I think would be much stricter than, this is already a pretty strict document, so.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay.
Real quick, I think at this time, Mr. O'Neill, we talked about the program, the flood mitigation program that we had in the city for a while, for residents to build up, and several residents did. And I sent you an email recently from Mr. Franco, who sent it to me on the flood mitigation program. I think we really need to kind of we need to put something in our, here we go, in our newsletter, letting people know that that program is available. But I think the discussion was with you and I that that program's available, but not in the same way it was in the past, and that people have to put a lot of money up front initially in order to get going with it. And so maybe if we could specify some of the rules and regulations. I know I probably have some emails too on it that I could share with you that Donna sent me.
Yeah, as I recall, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but as I recall, that was also one of those FEMA plans that was subject to funds available. In other words, you just, everybody along the coastline, the entire United States couldn't do it all at once. There's a limited fund of money available.
Right.
And I'm expecting after Superstorm Sandy, they ate up an awful lot of that money. But yeah, you have to apply for it, and they have to say, this year we've only got $40 million to put into that program or something. So it's not an open-ended grant. For all I know,
but
it may be closed
it's
already.
worth letting people know about if they have.
Well, I think what we could do is provide an update to the program in the city newsletter.
Right, sure.
And we can do that.
Yeah.
Great. Good.
Okay, all right. Do I have a motion to approve this ordinance?
Motion to approve?
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, I'll open it to the public for any input that anyone in the public has with regard to this ordinance. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to council. Is there any further questions or discussion?
No.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It passes. All right, we'll move on to the next item, and that is a discussion of city fence height requirements. Mr. O'Neill.
Yes, at the previous meeting, it was requested that this matter be placed on the next agenda. That has been done, and it's on the agenda for purposes of soliciting your ideas, thoughts, and direction to the staff on this matter.
Madam Mayor, I think that, we were going along a direction last week or last meeting when we had this discussion that an overall look at the ordinance itself needs to be happened, because there's some holes in it. There's some things that might not have been taken into consideration when it was written. There's some updating and improving and clarification that could happen. I would move at this point that we send this issue down to planning and zoning and let them give it a good hard look and come back to us with some recommendations on what those changes may be, and that we at that point can go forward on this subject and potentially get some of this put to bed once and for all, because it comes up.
And real quick, while we're on this discussion,
There's a
and
motion.
everybody's here, the Scenarios
Yeah,
that
it
I
was
had in
emotion,
the
yeah.
past, when I had young children on the river, I did come to the city years ago and wanted to put a fence up and whatnot, and I had some issues back then about the height and whatnot, and the height that they allowed, 30 years ago, I didn't feel was appropriate, because I basically said to them, I have a 2-year-old, he'll be up over there in no time. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, he's a pretty active young boy. And the other thing too is that, keeping children away and safe from pools, like around pool fences, they need to be higher. So those are kind of considerations I'd like to see. I think a pool fence really needs to be higher so that children can't get into them and drown.
Well, Bill made a motion. I would second that goes to P&Z. We do have some concerns as a long-standing issue, but I think this is the right path to take.
I agree.
Okay. Any input from the public? Mr. Brown?
I invited, in writing, 10 people to come over to my property and look at the fence across the street. To my knowledge, not one of you has showed up.
Oh, that's not true. I have. I've been over there. I know exactly what the fence looks like. I've been over to your property. I've seen it.
Does it obstruct my view of the lake?
Well, I'm not going to get into that right now, but
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. All right, the next issue is the discussion of city permit fees. Mr. O'Neill.
Yes, thank you. At the last meeting, a Port Richey resident, Mr. Roth, who is in attendance tonight, did speak directly to the council on building permit fees. We've looked into it, into the current fee schedule that was adopted in August 2005. I've included our relevant language regarding the fee schedule in the packet tonight for your review. I also included Pasco County. The council can take a look at this, advise us on how you want to see us proceed with regard to any review. Specific to Mr. Ross' case, he has a beautiful home and had a very expensive roof. The permit fee, I believe, specifically was about $700. Is that correct, Bill?
Sounds about right.
And however, Mr. Roth did receive a Paint Up Fix Up grant in the amount of $2,000. And by the way, I authorized that check today, so you shall receive that very quickly. Just lastly, this is on for your discussion and your direction. I just want to advise caution because it is a monetary item, and any changes in the current fee schedule will have budgetary effects. And also, as we looked at this and looked at various jurisdictions, it's a very difficult thing to compare across the board because every jurisdiction that we looked at does it differently. And it's not an apples to apples straight comparison. I tried to find a study or an analysis that was the basis for the action that was taken in 2005 by the City Council, and we were unable to find anything. So, that's what I would think you would need to do, is do a thorough analysis. And some jurisdictions are going to be less. In fact, maybe a lot of them would be. But then again, if they don't charge across the board for the same service at the same rate or a different rate, it's not an apples to apples comparison. So we solicit your direction on this, and we'll proceed in any manner that you see fit.
Comments?
Well,
Steve?
it's good.
We'll just swing it around.
Okay. No.
Go ahead.
Well, anyway, Mr. Roth, thank you for bringing it forward. The objective certainly to recover the cost of providing the service. I think when you had discussed it, you outlined some of what we see here already. The fee itself, 2.4% of the value. I don't know how that compares. I think and that might have been a question, how does that compare? There's obviously others in here, the review fee, the city engineer review, permit CO fee, et cetera. So I don't know where specifically we start other than to look at that percentage point. I know there's a lot of documentation in here, and I made some notes in there, but basically I think the focus was in regard to just the building permit fee area itself, not so much
Steve, were you on
electrical,
council when
et
this
cetera.
was adopted?
When was this adopted?
2005?
No, I was 2006.
Okay. If I recall, I wasn't on council when this was adopted, but I do recall that there was some extensive discussion and study and analysis before it was adopted.
I mean, now there's no longer the, obviously with the, I mean, he's going to get a check, and there are no funds after this, basically. So, we come back and say, hey, the cost of service, et cetera, but looking at this particular percent seemed to stick out the most in how that compares, and I'll be interested what others have to say.
Nancy?
I also know that I've had a lot of complaints from some of the air conditioning companies. There's two that I know of personally that are in the city of Port Richey, and they've always made a complaint about our air conditioning fees for permitting and whatnot, because their argument is people are putting in air conditioning units under our noses and not getting a permit, where the legitimate companies have to get the permit. They have to tack that permit onto the cost. And so these guys are losing business because they can't compete with these other people. So they really wanted us to kind of look at that. Now, I think we had at one point, could you please tell me what the air conditioning permit fee, do you know it off the top of your head, for a new unit?
It'd be the same, the 2.4%. But as far as that, people installing them without permits in order to, that's not just a Port Richey problem. That's a problem throughout the state. It's nothing
Right.
unique to us.
Yeah, but I'm just saying what their complaint was, basically, that, other people were putting them in without permits, and they were trying to be legitimate, and the cost just put them out of the ballpark. Or if they bid a project, I think they had some issues with that, but it was mostly the people who were doing it illegally. So 2.4%.
Well, I do see also, at the bottom of section 10-126, where it says that the permit valuations may be calculated using the latest building valuation data published by the International Code Council or other applicable model code organizations. So I would think there's some sort of guidance out there along what kind of lines we could be applying here. I mean, obviously, my understanding of permit fees have basically been, not necessarily as a huge revenue enhancer, but basically, you're utilizing a facility of the city, and we're, it's like by getting copies of minutes or public records requests. So, anytime percentages obviously factor into the equation, what one person pays is going to be way more than what somebody else's pays. And I'm not sure if a percentage approach is the best approach. I don't know. Again, from what I read in here, it's basically a responsibility of the city manager and the building official to, recommend what those fees are. And come to us with some sort of logical approach to it, because, I can't tell you right now what a roofing fee ought to be. I don't know,
Well, just as a comment, we certainly can do an analysis. I've tried to find, like I mentioned earlier, what was done before. I'm assuming that the council relied on some analysis, whether it was done in-house or by an outside agency or with the assistance of the building official organization, I'm not sure. But we can do an analysis and we can give you what we think would be appropriate if indeed there are any changes. My concern is, of course, we're in budget season. We all know what we have, and we do want to be ever so conscious about our fee structure and what we derive in revenue. And generally, as Councilman Colombo mentioned, you try and recover the cost of the service through the fee structure. And I can tell you already with the review that we have done, we don't do that now. We don't recover the cost of the service or the cost of operation of the department. So, I'm just urging caution. We could do an analysis and present the results to you at a future meeting.
The worst kind of legislation is legislation that's designed to cure one instant problem, and that looks like we're our direction here. We've got an issue raised by a resident as to his particular fees, and that's the kind of ad hoc approach that doesn't make sense in a legislative sense. So I just caution you to not be triggered by one event. This ordinance has been in place for 10 years. And I don't know that we've ever had an issue with it. Certainly, it's up to the rest of council, but I just think there are a lot of things the city needs to do besides another analysis. What's your pleasure?
You want to take it out to the public, see if they have anything to say?
Sure,
Maybe it'll help
we
me
can do
make
that.
a...
I'll open it to the public.
Carl Roth, 8031 Island Drive. I appreciate the challenges that the city faces. Basically, the roof that I replaced was like for like, so that's what I had, so that's what went back. One of the big challenges we've had as a city is from a community redevelopment standpoint. We're a blighted community, we recognize that. When we take a 2.4% tax on everything that's built in the city, basically we're stifling redevelopment. I think that's a fundamental challenge, and that's really what we've created here. When we contrast this with what other neighborhoods are doing, other jurisdictions, nearby and far by, there's big differences. I mean, right around the corner here with Pasco County, we're talking about 420% greater. With Newport Richey, we're talking about 1,250% difference. Those are big differences. And what your charge is, my understanding, under the council, is to decide what is reasonable. And according to the Oxford Dictionary, reasonable means having sound judgment, means being fair and sensible, and charging as much as is appropriate and fair. That's the decision at the table in front of this council. And taking a look at this and deciding what's fair and what's not is really your task. Mr. O'Neill highlighted some challenges that he has as it relates to budgets, okay? And from a budgetary standpoint, he needs to work through that, and as part and parcel of what are reasonable permit fees that go into that from a revenue source. And depending on your decision, if these fees are unreasonable, he has to consider that. And we're going through that budget process right now. So now's a good time to do it. Also, if we just look at for example, Mayor Taylor's taxes, $3,422 a year for her home. And if we applied the 420% differential, that would say Mayor Taylor's taxes are $14,375. Are those reasonable? I wouldn't think so. If we take Mr. O'Neill's salary at $94,000 a year and we applied the differential of 1,250%, that would provide Mr. O'Neill a salary of $1,175,000 annually. He may think that's reasonable, good idea, but it really comes to council to decide what is reasonable. And I submit that these fees are no different than that. You have to decide, are they reasonable for our community? And I haven't seen significant development take place here in the city. I would certainly like to see that. I think we can improve a lot of things, but I think we need to take a look at this and get rid of these extra taxes. That's is a barrier to making our city the place that it can be. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else from the public? Seeing none, bring it back to council. What's your pleasure?
Now, I'd go back historically, too, until around the time period we're talking about, which was 2005. And that was shortly after or right around the time we dropped our millage rate down to 3.9, as I recall. So in that political environment, in that particular council, there was a desire to get ad valorem taxes down and find money elsewhere, remembering the docking fee that was proposed and some of the other things that were brought up at that point in time. So I can only surmise that the quick and easy thing at that point in time to do to make a few extra bucks was to kick up, the 1.4, basically stick 1% extra on every one of the fees that were in here. Now, I'm guessing at that point, we'd have to talk to some of the folks that were back on council at that point in
Certainly, there
time.
must be council minutes. that
One would
should-
expect,
should
yeah.
illuminate
Yeah,
the
illuminate
situation.
why and how they came to that decisions. But that's basically, a little too easy and a little too coincidental for me that you basically got fees that, your 1.4s are kicked up to 2.4s, and then you have, just, I couldn't even tell you where some of these numbers come from. Temporary power requests got kicked up from $20 to $100, whereas after-hour inspection was left at $40. I don't know, So that's my problem, is that, I can't go through this and pick at every one of these and say what looks good and what doesn't. But if we could get back to, like you said, some former council minutes and find out, what discussion went on then, that would certainly be helpful. And
The other thing to do too is maybe develop a schedule where there's a certain amount of, common sense, where, let's say there's a project being done in 2.4%, but it exceeds the level that's set by council. Like, let's say it's $500.
Set a maximum.
yeah,
So
you'd almost have to set a maximum for every different thing. I mean, you'd have to set a different maximum for an air conditioner than you would for a roof. So you're getting back to the same thing. You're setting a maximum, which is the same as setting a fee for all, 'Cause, I mean, I can't, I can't tell you why I think, a percentage should apply to an air conditioner, as far as what our building department's involvement is. Now, maybe there is, but usually it's pretty cut and dry.
Steve?
This would have been after '05, because if we're talking about the docking that Dr. Hashem brought up, I don't believe that was during the first term. I think that was into the '08, after 2008, but that may reflect that. As far as some of the fees in here, yeah, I mean, we see from 25 to 40, we see from 75 to 150, et cetera, within the context of the fee schedule. Now, also of note, when Tom mentions that the cost of service, outweighs your little concern there, I'd like to see what those numbers actually are with this discussion. And we could see where we were if you look back when we had Burton here. We're talking about the water. We compared with other cities in certain spots to see where we were. Again, it's hard to see just from this, based on that percentage range, where we are, since there are so many different associated fees within this whole structure. So,
I think it's a really good point made there, Mr. O'Neill, that, unless we know what it takes to run that department, we can't possibly know how to move on this.
Tom, I don't know if you said, but did you run into any other municipalities using a percentage basis like this?
We just did a very limited review here locally.
Right.
We did, Bill got the city of Tampa
Right.
permit schedule. And, you know, I think for every review of any other agency, every single one was different.
Don't doubt it. Yeah,
And,
don't doubt it at all.
yeah, I think it's a good suggestion to try and research the council minutes and see exactly why the council adopted the current fee structure. And I can get that information back, and we can, you know, we can
Yeah.
continue the discussion, and, because it, you know, it needs to be fair, it needs to be reasonable. It was adopted in '05, and, you know, it's reasonable to relook at things like that from time to time.
Okay.
The other
Keeping
thing I
in
think.
mind too, oh, I'm sorry,
Right.
go ahead, Terry.
The other thing I think would be helpful, I know we don't want to cause additional hardship to people when they want to maintain their properties. But the fees are there for a reason. Along with that, I think would be helpful, because I know Tom is talking about impact to the budget on this. I think if we could look at maybe the last few years as to what the income was to the city through these fees, that we'd see how much of impact we're actually going to be, or is going to be occurring or possibly occurring to the budget. And that would help us, I think, look at this thing a little more clearly.
We can do that.
Yeah, I agree, because that at least gives us the upside of
Me
it,
too,
you know,
yeah.
and we can see, you know, what is the total we're looking at, and, you know, how might we modify it to make it more comfortable without hurting the city too bad. That's good, yeah, I'm with that.
Well, we talk about too, when you say fair and proportionate, remember, while we're talking about revenue, that, you know, we're all tasked with looking at other alternative revenues as well. I know that's a separate discussion. Maybe that's going to equate to a workshop. We actually had a workshop that talked about just revenues going back several years ago. I did a little bit of research and got some information from other leagues of cities. This one's from Minnesota. It's pretty interesting of a lot of things that are associated out there that I had no idea myself. So that might be something, you know, while we're on this topic, that we, you know, could have a separate meeting about.
Can you give that to Mr. O'Neill, and he can share
Yes.
it with the rest of council? That would be helpful.
Sure.
All right, anything else? So do we have a direction on this for Mr. O'Neill? You want to have the subsequent data gathering and set it for a future meeting?
Yes.
Okay,
Certainly, we can do that.
all
I mean,
right.
he feels this would be a general search. I mean, not something that's going to be, you know, we don't want, as mentioned, I don't think we want to dig in and spend 100 hours on it, but, you know, having some of this dug up would certainly be a help and give us some direction.
Okay.
Okay. All right, let's move on to item number 5, wet liner well repair. Mr. O'Neill.
Yes, I'm going to defer for purposes of the comments to Assistant City Manager Jocelyn Martinez on this.
Good evening, Council. What we're asking you to review and consider tonight is a repair of the wet well liner at one of the city's major lift stations located on Bay Boulevard and Wilkins Street. It has been reported that the lining, the fiberglass coating inside the lift station has incurred stress fractures. There's cracks. If you look inside the wet well, there's actually pieces of the lining just hanging. Our staff has done a visual inspection of the lift station. They've also televised the lift station. The problem with having a liner, a fiberglass coating that has cracks, is you run the risk of infiltration and exfiltration. We know from our records that this particular lift station was installed in 1988. We do not have records that indicate when the fiberglass coating was applied. What we're asking you to consider is a proposal from Green Monster Lining to put a different kind of liner inside the wet well. What you have in your packet is a proposal from Green Monster Lining explaining what the lining is made of, the process that Green Monster uses to apply the liner, and a piggyback contract from the city of Punta Gorda that has also utilized the Green Monster Lining for lift stations and for manhole repairs. The total cost of the application of the liner is $22,875. We would be paying for that out of the utility fund budget, and we're asking you to consider approving that proposal from Green Monster tonight.
Thank you. Questions?
$22,000 for a liner? That's insane. What's that stuff made out of? Liquid gold? Is this the only bid we have?
The Green Monster liner is a sole source provider of this type of lining. The more commonly used liner is the fiberglass coating which we had on the lift station before. But they are the only company that provide this type of specialized liner.
So what's the difference in price? Mr. Stewart, do you know, or?
It's about half. The point is, the Green Monster liner will last all of us. Another fiberglass liner will be lucky to get another 10 years out of it.
I want to just comment briefly, if I could. This is a pretty big project. It's on one of the city's master pump stations where it has quite a large service area. It's a big lift station. It has 20 horsepower submersible pumps in it. So it's a lot of work. What's needed to happen here is that the station itself will need to be taken out of service and bypassed, which is a pretty complex procedure. Both the gravity main and the force main that discharges from the station will need to be reconnected to a bypass pump to maintain service. So it's a pretty complex process to reline this station. And of course, what we're interested in is making sure that when we do a job that we don't have to go back there. We certainly can get you a price for a fiberglass liner. This is a cementitious concrete liner with a coating on top of it, because what the ongoing concern is, as we now have at this station, is infiltration, exfiltration, and also hydrogen sulfide corrosion of the existing concrete from the deteriorated liner. So if you would like to see an additional price, I would tell you that you could continue this or defer to the next meeting, and we could get a quote on a fiberglass liner. We can't sit here and tell you exactly what it is right now, but this is a government contract that we can piggyback on, and this is a widely used system in place.
I think the staff's done their job on this. They've done their due diligence. We have the information here. Question was answered. Motion to approve.
So the life expectancy of fiberglass is approximately 10 years, and this is like lifetime.
A fiberglass liner, if applied properly, as we would make sure would be more than 10 years. I can tell you in my sewer lifetime, I've seen a lot of them, a lot of different types of liners. This is an excellent product. A fiberglass liner as well is a good product. And if you want to look at the difference in prices, we could get you that along with the estimated lifetime from an engineering perspective.
Okay.
Yeah, because, I hear this, it's a lifetime warranty or a lifetime this. The company goes out of business 5 years from now. Really? This happens all the time. I really want to be a little bit more cautious before I throw $22,000 out for something I'm just not sure about.
Okay. Mr. Rowe, any input on this?
Well, on these kind of things, I always like to go to bid, but we're being told that this is the only place that makes this. I think if we were to put a bid out there that we need this thing renewed and find out what comes back, whether it be the fiberglass or whatever those prices, at least we'd have a wider spectrum of what may be available to us. And we can always go back to the piggyback if we desire. But I'm becoming more and more popular with the idea of bidding things out. I like to know what I'm paying for, and I like to know what my other options are.
I mean, I agree. I like to bid things out, but again, this is a unique product, so you can't really compare it apples to oranges. But what you can do is, as the mayor suggested, come back with some suggestions and some prices on some fiberglass, and then we can make that decision. This may be the so-called Cadillac of lift station liners, and we'd like to buy the Cadillac everything around here, but there's times when you have to, like Nancy says, okay, they say it's a lifetime, it's going to last a lifetime, but whose lifetime are they talking about? So.
Well, even if there isn't a warranty, so to speak, there are certain life expectancies.
Sure.
of
Oh,
different kinds of
absolutely,
products,
absolutely.
and that's
And I
important to get our.
And I don't doubt it's a superior product. I just, I'd like to have something to compare it with myself.
Okay.
We certainly can get that information and get a quotation, which once again would be on a government contract for a fiberglass liner, and compare the differences, and I would make a recommendation to you, at that time,
Okay.
if that's your wishes.
I think it is. All right. Let's move on to item number 6, the interlocal agreement redesignation of the Pasco County Metropolitan Planning Organization. Mr. O'Neill.
Yes, in front of you tonight for consideration is a new interlocal agreement for the redesignation of the Metropolitan Planning Organization, more fondly known to us as the MPO. And it essentially redesignates the MPO, which develops the county and the city's long-term transportation plans for county-maintained roads and state-maintained roads. And it redesignates it under the current format, and this must be done every 10 years. It maintains the current voting membership structure. I believe that that's functioned effectively on behalf of the needs of the county and the cities during that time. Each and every city is required to execute this MPO agreement by the state of Florida. The city of Zephyr Hills approved the agreement at their last council meeting, and I understand Dade City and Newport Richey will consider the interlocal agreement at their next commission and council meetings. The cities of St. Leo and San Antonio are not represented on the MPO, and I have sent this agreement to city attorney, and he has reviewed this. We're recommending approval of this agreement.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Anyone from the audience wishing to speak to this item? Yes, Mr. Roth, come forward, please.
Earl Roth, 8031 Island Drive, Port Richey, Florida. I hope as part of this agreement that we get some benefit out of it, particularly as it relates to the changes that are going on in US 19 right now. There's been a lot of discussion from people on the west side of US 19 and access to northbound, and also access from southbound US 19 to the west side of 19, and the particular impacts associated with disaster evacuation. So, thank you.
Okay. Anything else from council? We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Is there anything else before we adjourn?
I just wanted to remind Mr. Roth that with access on 19, we actually appealed to the DOT with that, and they basically told us there's nothing that we can really do.
I'll tell you, it's going to be a mess if we have an evacuation. I have gone over there, and even on a regular evening when there isn't much traffic, it is horrendous trying to get down south of the area that you need to go past. And I mean, they have no, it looks to me they have no egress. They have ingresses, but they don't have egresses. And I just see a horrible mess there if anybody needs to get out of there in a hurry.
I couldn't agree more.
Well,
I couldn't agree more.
And it's
As we've argued previously to deaf ears.
as it's sad to see, it continues to kind of fracture our city into it makes it harder and harder to get from one part of the city to the other. Not just on the south side, wait till they get done on the north side. They're closing an awful lot of those pass-throughs down, where you come into Bay Boulevard there, that's closing down. There's a whole bunch of them that are gonna be closed down. And it just gets, you basically got our, several sections of the city bisected by the river and by 19, and it's hard to get from one spot for another. I mean, I'm watching on the south side now as boats that want to head north or trailers that want to head north are coming out at Cedar and driving south and trying to do a U-turn at Avery. And it's crazy because you get some of these boats and trailers, there's just not that much room to turn, not to mention waiting for the break and the traffic to get through there. But,
Even a car trying to make from those stacking lanes to make a turn into going north, it takes 3 lanes.
Yeah.
I have one other question. Tom, I know back a few months ago, there was some movement to eradicate the trailers from over on Lemet. And I see they're painted now, and it seems like they're trying to fix them up again. Can you give us any information as to where that's going?
Yes, the park changed ownership, and they evicted all of the tenants, and at this point in time, no one lives there. And it was the owner's desire at that point to improve and fix all violations on all of the trailers. They have done that. They haven't completed it, but they have moved in that direction. They have attempted to assure us that their clientele in the future will be different. That remains to be seen, but they have made a considerable attempt to try and clean the park up and fix code violations that are there. And of course, that's their right as private property owners. At one point, there will no longer be a mobile home park there. But at this point, they have rights as property owners. And so we have permitted certain improvements to certain trailers there, which is their right to do.
Okay. We stand adjourned.